Alrighty, in this lesson we're going to model the basic body of the mouse. So let's just dive right in. I'm going to grab this cheese and move it over so we have the center space free to work with. Again, if the holes get displaced and it bothers you, you can toggle the boolean's visibility on and off to get it to reset, but we'll be positioning the cheese again later. Then, I think I'll select both the cheese and the walls and use M to move them to another layer for now. Put them on a layer that's different from the multispheres layer and hide it. Anyway, let's use Shift A to add in a brand new UV sphere. This will be used to make the main body of our mouse. Pressing S, Z, then holding down Control, I'm going to scale it down just one tick on the Z axis. Then I'll do the same thing along the X axis. Finally, I'll scale it up by 1.5 times on the Y axis. I'm basically just stretching the sphere into a shape that'll work a little better for modeling a toy mouse. Tab it into edit mode, press numpad 3 for side view, and hit Z for wireframe view. Next, press A to deselect everything, then B for box select. I want to select all of the vertices that are below the green line. Press X for delete and choose vertices. By doing this, we've deleted the bottom half of the sphere, leaving behind a dome. Select this single frontmost vertex. Now, I'd like to introduce a very useful trick for editing vertices. If you press O, that will turn on something called proportional editing. What this means is when you grab one or more vertices, they extend a sort of gravity field around them that pull the nearby vertices to a lesser extent. You can use your scroll wheel to increase or decrease this fall off. I'm going to go on a little tangent for a bit, so no need to follow along, but you can check out this little drop-down window, which is set to disable by default. The hotkey O switches it between that and enable, but there are also two other options you can manually select here. Connected means the gravity field will only travel down the connected edges, so if we had an additional separate chunk of vertices nearby, they wouldn't be affected. Personally, I think I use connected the most, with enabled being a close second, and of course it's useful to have it disabled as well. Hopefully that makes it clear how much less tedious it can be to edit a mesh's vertices the way you like, especially for things like organic modeling. Anyway, getting back on track, select just this frontmost vertex and make sure proportional editing is enabled. I'm going to hit numpad 7 for top view, then I'm going to press G and Y for grabbing along the Y axis. I'm going to scroll my field of influence to about 1.6 or 1.7, which, by the way, you can read down here on this bar. Then, holding down Control, I'll move this down by -0.5. As usual, you don't need to be super precise with all these things. 3D modeling is an art, and all I'm doing is trying to rough out the basic shape of a toy mouse. Next, let's patch up this hole in the bottom. Hold down Alt and click on one of these edges that form this bottommost ring. This will select all the vertices in that ring. If you hit Ctrl F, that will bring up a menu with all sorts of actions you can do. Some of them have their own hotkeys listed, while others can only be used via this menu. Now we could use the hotkey F to fill this edge loop with one giant face, but I'm actually going to discourage that. I haven't taught you anything about what topology is or why it matters, but I'll make a bonus video that delves into that some more. For now, I'll just say this. Our cheese was modeled using some pretty quick and dirty techniques, so it has terrible topology. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that, as it suits our needs perfectly fine, but I'd like to also teach you somewhat cleaner practices with the mouse. So, after hitting Ctrl F, navigate instead to Grid Fill. This will attempt to spiderweb a bunch of vertices across this region using quad-only topology, which is a good thing. However, we want to minimize stretching, and we also want it to be symmetrical, so we're going to tweak these settings here to get this to look right. I believe a span of 6 and an offset of 5 ought to work right, but you may need to tweak this. Start with a span of 6, and then increase or decrease the offset until you get perfect symmetry going down the center. This is important for our next step. You should wind up with something that looks extremely similar to what I have here. Press A to deselect everything, numpad 7 for top view, and make sure you're in wireframe view. I'm going to use B to box select the entire left half of this model. Be careful not to select any vertices that lie along the center line. You may need to zoom in a bit at the center to make sure you get all the vertices on just the left side. After that, press X for delete and choose vertices. Assuming everything was symmetrical, this ought to delete exactly half of the model. Now, navigate to the Modifiers menu and add in a Mirror modifier. This will mirror all the vertices of your mesh along the axis you specify using the object's center point as a reference. This means we can now edit one side of the mesh and have those changes automatically reflect to the other side. But there are a few settings we should look at. This little cube icon will hide or show the effects of the modifier while you're in edit mode. The triangle next to it will further show you the exact vertices it's generating, which you can select in the 3D viewport. Notice that if you select a vertex on either side, it selects the mirrored vertex too. However, also notice that even if you select a vertex on the left side, moving it around will be inverted because until you apply this modifier, these vertices on the left don't really exist yet. They're just taking the mirrored location of the vertex on the right side, which is what you're actually moving. I'm going to skip over the rest of these options except this one that says clipping. What this does is make it so that if two vertices meet in the center, instead of moving past each other, they fuse together permanently as soon as you set them down. I turn this option on and off all the time based on what I'm doing. For instance, don't follow along, but if I wanted to pull the sides of the mouse outward and had proportional editing on, it might pull the vertices on the center line out and rip a hole in the middle of our mouse. Having clipping on would prevent that. However, if I wanted to add a new chunk of vertices to this mesh and move them to one side, clipping would also prevent that from happening correctly. So I'll turn it on and off as needed. For now, let's turn it on. Now nothing fancy here, I'm just going to select one of these edge vertices near the back and pull it out a little to give the mouse a slightly less perfectly oval shape. And honestly, that ought to be enough for modeling the base body of our mouse. I'm just going to tab into object mode, set it to smooth shading, and call it good for this lesson. We covered some important concepts. Proportional editing and using a mirror modifier are both powerful tools to add to your arsenal. If you're interested in learning more about topology, like I said, I'll be recording a short bonus video that covers the subject in a bit more depth. You don't have to watch it to complete the tutorial, but I would highly recommend it anyway. At any rate, next time we'll give our mouse some eyes, ears, and a nose. Later.